just to start off, why don't you start off with your name and your NF journey so far?
My name's Nicole and my daughter Skylar, who is 7 now, has NF type 1, and she was diagnosed officially when she was 14 months old. The journey actually started at 5 months of age, but she didn't meet criteria for testing. And then we did seek out a second opinion with her leg. She has a pretty rare presentation of NF and with pseudoarthrosis. And so that was what started it all. And the first time we ever heard of NF was when she broke her leg. So then we sought out genetic testing after our orthopedic surgeon said, like, look, we need to know if she has NF or not, because that could make things harder for us. So we did raise money to get genetic testing because our insurance denied coverage. So we did blood work when she was about 13 months. It was like right before surgery, and then it took about 6 weeks to get the results back. And so yeah, we've been dealing with it since she was a baby, really.
Could you just explain how it's affected her?
In NF, bone abnormalities can be something that kids present with, but most often people think of like scoliosis, but tibial bowing is something that can occur. And so for her, she had a bowed leg at birth, but a lot of infants do. So that's fairly common. And our pediatrician was like, yeah, that will straighten out. Then when she was 5 months, she broke her leg it was like a week shy of her 5-month birthday. We were like bouncing her up and down, and she just started like screaming. And so that led to this whole journey. At the time when it happened, when we met with our pediatrician and got x-rays at the hospital, they actually thought it was bone cancer. So we had to travel down to Indianapolis, where our local big children's hospital is. And that was when they told us that she had something called pseudoarthrosis. And we later found out that is basically, that term derives from false joint tibial or pseudoarthrosis false joint. And so like the bone, it is bowed, and then it becomes really fragile, and then it breaks eventually. It's normally like not if, it's when it's going to happen. So for her, she was really young. What little information there is, she was really young for that to happen. And once it breaks, the bone doesn't want to heal. For some reason, they don't really know why, but it's localized in that particular area of the body. Now, there are some kids that have pseudoarthrosis of like the clavicle and the arm. In my support group, there's a couple, and not all of them have NF. But when you do have pseudoarthrosis, it's like a high chance. They said like 50%, if not, our surgeon, I think, said 65% of people with pseudoarthrosis do have NF. So they started like questioning us then from then on, like family history, blah, blah, blah. And we were like, no, we've never heard of NF. We have no idea what you're talking about. But at the time, they just kept saying, well, it might not heal. She needs a brace. She's probably going to need to have surgery. The structure and the makeup at the cellular level is mishapped. And for some reason, NF makes it worse. And so in NF, the healing is even worse in pseudoarthrosis. And so our surgeon in Chicago and I just put together an article for NF Midwest for the first time ever. There will be a pseudoarthrosis article for other NF families. And I hope that that can spread further than just NF Midwest, because there's just not a lot of information out there. So that's a little bit about pseudoarthrosis. Is some kids end up with amputations. Sometimes that's by choice from the family if they choose not to seek surgical intervention. Sometimes it's failed attempts of surgery, then they choose amputation. We've had about 7 surgeries in 7 years, and we had healing until she had an accident on December 29th, and she re-broke the leg getting on a step stool. She wasn't in her brace, which she normally doesn't wear her brace at night. And so we had to basically start all over again. But we're having success right now. The bone looks really, really good. And she got a new rod and plates and all that. For anyone who doesn't really know much about it, I typically say like she's got a bone disability caused by NF, and that she has a fragile leg, and she has to wear a brace when she's walking around or doing anything active, because if it breaks, it might not heal. And that's typically what I like to tell people, short and sweet.
Right. Does she have any other symptoms of NF?
They're all like on an outward level. So she has cafe au lait spots. So she had about 2 shortly after birth. We noticed them. By the time we saw like full on genetic testing, she had about 10. So by that point, she pretty much did meet criteria, but at 5 months of age, she didn't have enough cafe au lait. So those are the birthmarks that, I mean, like 90, I think if you look like NF Midwest, their informational sheet on like all the different symptoms, I mean, cafe au laits are probably at the top of the list. I think they said 95% of all people with NF have that. She now has them virtually everywhere except like her face. She doesn't really have many on her arms, but like front, back, legs, buttocks, all that. She's got just very, very faint, the little bumps on her belly and on her back, and that is it. And to anybody who doesn't know what that is, you probably wouldn't even know it, but I know it. And the, neurologist said so. She has some MRI abnormalities, but they're very minute and not enough to really do anything about. She has what they call UBOs, like the very first MRI she had after diagnosis, just to get a baseline. They're called unidentified bright objects. And I guess NF patients have them. Our neurologist said that if you scanned like all the NF brains, you would see that pop up. Not everybody, but it's really common, I guess. And it doesn't really mean anything. The one thing that could mean something is she's got something called dural ectasia, which is like a widening of like the spinal column, or like, I don't know, they say it's like a widening, and it can cause like numbness and headaches, which I guess can be common in NF patients. She does not have any of those symptoms, but we know it's on the lumbar spine in the MRI. They did see a very small cyst when she was like 3, but her neurologist said it's not like a peripheral nerve tumor or anything like that. So she hasn't had an MRI since she had 3 of them in total, 1 full body, 1 when we transferred her care from up north to back to Indianapolis for neurology. So she'll have to have another MRI right before puberty is his next time that he would like, knowing that puberty can bring some unknowns. So last year we go yearly, and he said that we would probably just follow up, right before she hits puberty. But other than that, when you look at her intellectually, she doesn't have any of the disabilities there, which we know is, 50% of all NF can cause that. And so she's actually was tested for high ability and ended up being right on point. So she's not quite high ability, but, not on that spectrum at all. And it's the physical delays. I mean, just when you can tell she's tiny. That was one thing on the looking back, her growth chart. She had poor weight gain, poor height, low height, and still to this day. So she's pretty tiny, and sounds like that's a pretty common thing in NF as well.
And she was the first one in your family?
Yep. I'm the oldest child. My husband's the oldest child, and we were the first to have a grandchild on each side. So tracing back, we don't have any single genetic disorder, period. Nobody. I'm not even learning disabilities, really. So it was just a complete shock to us. And this was definitely like a big, huge learning curve for everybody, because nobody's ever had a kid, for like no cousins, nobody that's ever had a child with a disability. So it's kind of weird when some families, I was a pediatric nurse, so you'd see kids with families that had disabilities, but you just never thought that would happen to you. It took us a long time to decide if we wanted to have more kids because of that. But by that point, our geneticist, who we met with for the first 2 years, and then she cleared us, we didn't have to see her anymore. She basically said, like, at this point, like, it would have to be another spontaneous, fluky thing. And the only way you'd ever really know for sure is if you basically evaluated like every egg and every sperm, and we would never do that. So they're 4 years and 10 months apart. So we do have a daughter. She's 2.5, and she is healthy. And so far, we don't see any signs of anything with her.
What for you has been the hardest part?
The hardest part is fearing that something's going to happen. Like when everything happened back in December, that had literally been a nightmare. Like I would think about things like that. Like she'd be really active and playing in the summer without her brace, like in the water, like 'cause she was really active and getting really strong. And, every once in a while I'd think, what if she fell? Like, what if it broke? Like, but then I'd like push it back in my mind. So when that happened, like it was gut wrenching. And I was just talking to my husband yesterday. Her brace is coming off, or her cast for the first time since December. It's coming off, and she's getting her new brace on Tuesday of next week. And so I am fearful of what that's going to be like. Am I going to be scared that she's going to fall in her brace or out of her brace or something? But, and like the doctor's appointments, just, I stopped working full time after Skylar. So luckily as a nurse, I'm able to have that flexibility in my career. But I think to myself when I would want to change jobs, well, I can't work this day. I have to make sure I always have one day a week off for therapy or one day a week off for going to the doctors. Like, I don't know how someone could work 5 days a week. And my husband does, but I'm that, I just think that that's probably the hardest part, is just always making sure you have an availability, because you're going to have a doctor's appointment and you're going to have to face a surgery or something like that.
How does your daughter feel about having NF?
That's a good question. I would say prior to the accident, she always would say, like, I have a special leg. So we started telling her that when she was really early on. And when she started preschool for the first time, when she was 4, one day she did come home and say, Mommy, the kids asked me what was wrong with me, and I had to like tell her what to say. And eventually she got super brave to the point where when she would get a new brace, she wanted to show it off, and she was proud of that leg, and she was getting more and more comfortable with talking about it. And she doesn't know all the details, but she would go to NF conferences. I speak at Notre Dame, their Center for Rare and Neglected Diseases. So she's been exposed to that, and she knows about that. So she would be proud of that and not scared. Fast forward to after her accident, that was hard. She went through a period of aggression and depression, I would call it, even though she was never prone to that before, where she would just have angry outbursts. So she was wheelchair bound for a couple months. And she would say, like, why did this have to happen to me? Why does my leg have to be this way? And that was by far the hardest thing to work through. Not only that, but like, this last surgery, we, for the first time ever, really, really did talk about amputation. But our surgeon really thought that where the break was and the reason why it happened, we had a chance for it to be successful. And we decided, like, look, she's old enough that she has to make that decision now too. And we showed her pictures, and I talked a little bit about it. And she said, like, Mommy, I don't want a metal leg. Why can't he just fix my leg? And so, just things like that, like, how can you, you shouldn't have to talk about that with a 7-year-old, but I would say she's rather mature for her age in talking about it. And the more mobile she got in the cast, when she finally was allowed to use a walker, where she was finally allowed to put weight on it, she got more and more confident again. So I really hope that she gets back to that when she gets the brace, and that she's not scared to talk about it. But
Yeah.
I think as parents, like, we have to instill courage into her that, like, you can do anything you want. You just might have to do it a little slower or a little bit differently because of your special leg. So I would say for the most part, she's coped very, very well, but the last couple months have been really challenging.
She sounds like a really brave, strong girl. Do you think that there's anything that you've gained from this disorder?
For our family, like, honestly, it really brought like our whole family and community together. Like, when we had to raise money for Skylar, like, we would have never been a couple that would have like asked for help or asked for not handouts, but we were very reluctant to that help. And in the beginning, financially, we were really struggling. And to see like our family surround us was just really inspiring. The second thing is, and just in my career in general, the opportunities that have come my way because of Skylar with Notre Dame, and just the education that we're getting to bring an entire community of students that are going to be doctors to educate them on NF and pseudoarthrosis is amazing to me. I like to educate about that as much as I can. And then my career as a nurse, the time doing inpatient pediatrics, I got to really experience what these parents who were dealing with kids with disabilities and disorders, I had seen it my whole career, but never really experienced it firsthand. So I always hope that if we had to have a kid with this, what can we do about it? And this, writing the article for other parents, there was nothing available like that to us. We could not type in NF Midwest and get this pretty article about pseudoarthrosis. It was Google a support group on Facebook. What do you know? Where can I go? I mean, it was not very easy. There is a lot of information about NF, and I think that's fantastic. But for the teeny little percentage that has pseudoarthrosis on top of it, I feel like we're in, the person at Notre Dame that does the rare disease, she said, we're like a rare disease within a rare disease. So
Yeah.
it's like not a lot of people know a ton about it, and where do you go to get that help and support? And so we're really thankful for Diana at NF Midwest, because she's partnered with, she's come to Notre Dame and done a lot there, and pushing me to do this article was a big deal.
What has been your experience with NF, or what has the organization done for you and your family?
In the very beginning, when I first joined it, they sent me a packet of information. And at the time, I believe I had already gotten kind of interconnected with Notre Dame when Skylar was, I think she was about 18 or 24 months old. Our pediatrician happened to be good friends with the person who did this at Notre Dame. So we kind of worked hand in hand. They knew I was a nurse. So I was in the process of getting ready to do a speech for Notre Dame students, and I needed more information just about like NF and things like that from the medical standpoint. And so I had done like the search, and they mailed me like the big folder of information. And prior to that, my husband really wasn't like wanting to hear a lot about it. Like coping for me, it was digging in. Coping for him was, I just want to focus on her, and let's just deal with what's going on right now and not read into a bunch, it's her leg that's the problem, nothing else. And one day I had that packet sitting on the table, and I was like writing my speech, and it was that NF Midwest folder, and like he started looking through it, and it was easy to read, and it was on, people could understand it just by opening up. And that kind of started the ball rolling of my family really wanting to hear about it. And then getting to speak then about NF at Notre Dame, we would invite family to come. And then like every year more family would want to hear about it. And then it just kind of went on from there. So I think for us, it was about providing really easy information to people who are non-medical, that can just, easily look at what does it mean for my kid, and, helping. I know that she's a resource if we really needed something in the NF world other than our orthopedic stuff. And I think just partnering with me and Skylar's surgeon to do this pseudoarthrosis article, like she's going to be doing this, and her pushing us and asking us to do this is going to help a ton of other families out that are just like us, that had nowhere to really turn to and no information. Because, really you can look up NF and you'll see a teeny little paragraph about bone abnormalities, and that's it. And pseudoarthrosis is a whole world in and of itself. And so that's really cool to have an article like that.
Yeah, absolutely. What advice would you give to somebody or a parent that is new to the NF world?
Take it day by day, but at the same time, like, be the advocate for your child. Get on that website, click on that information, request information from NF Midwest or another organization in your region. Learn as much as you can, because you're going to learn more than what some doctors know, and you're going to be the one to have to advocate for your child. So knowing as much as you can is going to help you and your child out in the long run. Just stay positive and know that your child can still do anything, and you can be their biggest cheerleader just by being positive.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you for all the information and sharing your story.